Okay. Ready? Okay. Okay, I am calling the meeting to order, and it's only 5:17 on July 18th, 2024, the Design Review Committee. So I'm going to start out with Lisa. A roll call, please.
Member Lapp?
Here.
Member Kavanaugh?
Here.
Member Martin? Yes. Vice Chair Dryden Hess? Absent. Chair Jacobson Bates?
Present. Okay, I'd like to ask Member Christopher Lapp to lead our Pledge of Allegiance, if you would join us in the audience.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next item is the order of the agenda. I believe,
Yes.
Raphael?
So items 4B and 4C, so that's the Denmarket Square and the Rosserman item. I am requesting that these items be pulled from the agenda and be heard on a meeting date certain of July 25th, which is next Thursday at 5 p.m. So those will not be a part of our public hearing this evening, or public meeting.
Thank you, Raphael. All right, then do we need a motion to approve the agenda with items that remain? May I have a motion to that effect?
I'll motion that.
So we have a first with Chris. Do I have a second? Mary Vaughn, second. Roll call, please, Lisa.
Member Lapp?
Yes.
Member Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Member Martin? Yes. Vice Chair Dryden Hess? Absent. Chair Jacobson Bates?
Yes. Okay, we're going to move on to consent items. And Lisa, can you please introduce this item?
Items on consent are typically routine and will be approved in one motion. The chair will call on anyone wishing to address the committee on any consent item on the agenda which has not been pulled by the committee for discussion. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once, and comments will be limited to a total of 3 minutes.
Okay, do we have anybody in person here would like to speak in the public comments on consent items? I see none. Moving on to Zoom, anybody on video that'd like to speak? Okay, and committee members, anything that you would like pulled from the consent agenda? All right, if not, I'll take a motion to approve consent items.
So moved.
Second.
Lisa, roll call vote, please.
Member Lapp?
Yes.
Member Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Member Martin? Vice Chair Dryden Hess? Absent. Chair Jacobson Bates?
Yes. Okay, so now we're going to move on to public communications to non-agenda items. Lisa?
The committee welcomes your input. At this time, you may address the committee on items not on the agenda. The time limit is 3 minutes.
Okay, we're going to start with in person, and I have a slip here from Lansing Duncan. Lansing, would you like to come up, introduce yourself there at the mic?
Thanks, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Lansing Duncan. I've lived in the Valley for way too long and been involved in many different aspects of community planning in both the Valley and the county. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about Wildwood, the Builder's Remedy project, which is proposed for the property next to the Mercantile and Nielsen Shopping Center. It's a case where the developer wants to build basically twice as many units on twice as much land as the city has planned for in terms of high-density housing. And the city didn't plan for building all this high-density housing on the site because it's a very challenging site with steep topography, with the Mission Aqueduct there, with soils that are expensive to build on, and some difficult things in terms of access and traffic impacts. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is the visibility of the project. And if you look at this picture here, you'll see this site as you see it as you drive down Alamo Pintado. However, what I want to call your attention to, when you're driving down Alamo Pintado, you see this from half a mile away. There's a point after you leave Sunnyfields Park that the road takes a little turn, and then from that point on, you look at this property. And you can see actually these two trees that are up on the hill. One is an incredibly bonsaied valley oak, and another one is a really big live oak that have been there a really long time. One of them is at least 200 years old, and they really demark the site. My point being, however, is that you see this site from so far away, and it influences you as you're coming into Solvang. Well, now just imagine, instead, you're just going to see an infinite row of houses, okay? And they're not going to be up there where those trees are. That's because they're actually totally rebuilding this site, grading it and building up a steep slope much closer to the road. So they're actually about 20 feet closer, the top of the hill is, than it is right now, once they finish building, rebuilding the site. And then they'll have a very large retaining wall. There's, I think it's about 200 feet of retaining wall now on the site. Varies in height. Some of it's 4 feet, some of it's a little bit more than that. It says plus or minus in the plan, so you can't really tell. Then another thing I'd point out to you is it's asking for a reduced setback on Old Mission, and that's right at the corner where the U.S. Bank is. And if you remember this building, it was built 10 feet closer to Alamo Pintado than any of the plans or members of the public saw the building as illustrated being. And that corner is the high corner of the whole intersection of Alamo Pintado and 246, and that's where we really needed sort of lower elevation, but now we've got higher elevation. Well, now you're going to have buildings that are set across it that are much closer in the setback, half the distance in the setback that they would normally be. So I definitely think there are some visual issues that you will need to tackle when you look at it. When I look at it personally, I find that the lack of eaves makes it look cheap to me. And when I speak to builders, they tell me that gives you problems in terms of your waterproofing. And I sure know that living in a Mediterranean climate, it helps to have eaves. We definitely need that. So I'm sure you'll find some issues with the physical design of the buildings too. The shed roofs on the balconies and patios also, I think, don't look particularly great. And of course, this is just going to be the biggest project we've had in Solvang in, I don't know, Skip Mesa, you know? This is a lot of units in a place we really don't need a lot of units. Thank you.
Thank you, Lansing. Anybody else in the room that would like to speak on items not on the agenda? Is there anybody on Zoom? So not seeing anybody there, we will move on to discussion items. So staff, please introduce item 4A and provide that report.
Discussion and provide direction on potential zoning ordinance amendments.
Thank you, Chair. So this morning, or this evening, is a study session item. So what we're presenting to the DRC is a draft ordinance that's not, that we're hoping to get feedback on, make any suggested changes to, and then ultimately bring this ordinance back to both the Planning Commission and the City Council. So the expected timeline of this is to take this to the Planning Commission in September, as well as take it to the City Council at the end of September for codification and adoption. So just to give everyone a primer of entitlement processing here in the city, the overarching document is what's considered the 2045 Solvang General Plan, which was recently adopted on July 8th. That is the policy document that we utilize to make everything sort of consistent amongst each other. This evening, we will be discussing the zoning ordinance. So that is the one document that is below, directly below the general plan. So the general plan, while it was a effort of 4 years, it is simply a policy document. That policy document can be amended. That policy document gets implemented, and there are various implementation measures. And one of those implementation measures is amending our zoning ordinance. So think of the general plan as a 50,000-foot level document that helps guide the growth and development of the city. Now, in order to actually execute the growth and development of the city, we actually need a set of plans, and that set of plans is considered the zoning ordinance. From the zoning ordinance, there's actually other plans that deviate from that. The first one being the Village Estate Specific Plan number 2, which was adopted by ordinance in 1991, which is why it's shown as an offshoot. But the main documents that implement the zoning ordinance or say have consistency with the zoning ordinance is the conditional use permits or variances, development plans, which at this point we're proposing to rename these as development permits, subdivisions, and what is considered the land use permit, and why it says under their proposed zoning clearance. From these, these 3 circles typically require one last layer, and that's building permits. So the building permits are the actual execution of entitlements. So those are the ones that provide us the details of what we're actually constructing. That is what's submitted to our building department for construction, and then ultimately what gets inspected and built, in which finally you have project completion. Now, there is a sort of offshoot, and that's that land use permits. Again, we're proposing to rename these as zoning clearances because there are times where a zoning clearance doesn't necessarily require a building permit. So in our instance, in our current codes form, a land use permit is required for things such as recoloring a building here in the TRC and other things that don't quite hit the level of a building permit, but they do require some sort of entitlement. So again, that's why there's that dashed line that goes to project completion. So again, the focus this evening is on this level, which is the zoning ordinance, and that's, I'm going to take you back to the Wayback Machine here to 1990. Believe it or not, Chairs, number 1 show in 1990. At this time in this week in 1990, MC Hammer had the number 1 album, actually in July 23rd. Windows 3.0 came out. George H.W. Bush was our president. Car phones were all the rage because they were beginning to be cheap, about $1,000 $1990. And our zoning ordinance was actually crafted and adopted in July 23rd, 1990, to be exact. So to give an example of this is our zoning ordinance. On the left-hand side is the typewriter ordinance that was pulled directly from the ordinance. And then what you see on the right-hand side is the now internet version of it. Nothing's changed. Maybe, outside of it being from chapter 14 to chapter 11, that's about the extent of the change. Many chapters of our zoning code reflect this. There have been incremental changes here and there in regards to minor changes in language, minor changes in uses, et cetera. But for the most part, our zoning ordinance is sort of this testament of time, and that time is 1990. And then even then, that time frame stretches back further than that, simply because the city at the time adopted a good chunk of the majority of that code from Santa Barbara County. So what I'm relaying to you is that it's time that we take a look at our zoning ordinance and take a good microscopic look at it and see how is it working for us today, what needs to get changed, and ultimately what needs to get done and amended to implement your newly amended general plan. So the framework for potential amendments come from these 2 primary missions. Mission number 1 is City Council's primary goals for the 2024-26 fiscal cycle, which is to streamline entitlement and building. The second one is the general plan itself. So the general plan, again, contains policies and frameworks. Key policies in the general plan includes adoption of design standards, the ability to do mixed-use projects in the TRC and other zones, et cetera. And so while that's stated in the document, in the policy document itself, we technically can't do it because it's not in the zoning code. Because remember, that it's a hierarchy. We got to go up and down to be consistent. And right now, we have the top one that's done. Everything else is completely out of whack. So we're proposing a substantial overhaul to the zoning ordinance beginning in September. And that includes a realignment of particular zoning districts, doing a basic consolidation, particularly in our DR20 districts that all essentially say the same thing. Consolidation of some of our lower density districts into sort of common nomenclature. using R1, R2, R3 standards, which again, it's an industry standard. Real estate professional, land professionals, when they hear the word R and the 1, they kind of automatically understand, hey, that's a single family residence or a single unit residence. The other big change is looking at our code and looking at the ease of use of our code. If you look at our code today, it's a lot of what I call gobbledygook. It takes me forever and our staff forever and a day to make determinations of what can be used, where the actual development standards are located. Case in point, our current development standards for the TRC are located, believe it or not, in 4 places. Place number 1 is actually in the TRC text itself. Place number 2 is in the landscape standards. Place number 3 is in a set of setback standards that is buried in the landscape standards. And place number 4 is sitting in our implementation chapter, which is 16. That's a lot of places and a lot of times things that city staff can miss, as well as a developer or property owner when they're looking to redevelop a piece of property. So the idea is to take all that knowledge that we have in the code and put it into a nice, easy table. It does one of 2 things. One, it provides us the ability to do easy handouts to the public as well as residents and put together handbooks with these. When someone asks, hey, what can I do with my property? We can easily give them a table and say, this is what you can do with your property. Second one is take all of our standards and make comparison charts with them. So here, in this instance, table 11.7, we have the proposed zoning districts laid out, as well as the ability to analyze very quickly the differences between each district in terms of height, setbacks, building form, FAR, which is floor area ratio, et cetera. So currently, in order for us to do that today, we have to flip through chapter upon chapter upon chapter, and it's not in an easy to read, good format and good location. So that's one of the bigger changes that we're proposing. And then as part of your packet, we gave you chapter 7, which is the primary TRC commercial chapters to which this body oversees. One of the other larger changes is introduction of what we call overlay zones. So an overlay zone creates an additional regulation for a specific area to address specific needs or objectives. Overlay zones are frequently used in zoning ordinances or codes to preserve areas such as sensitive environmental features. So a great example is if we had an area of open space that we want to preserve that's overlaid amongst various zoning districts, you do an overlay zone, and that adds extra sort of protection to that sort of open space area. Preserve historic buildings. You'll typically see overlay zones for historic districts outlaid in a lot of zoning ordinances throughout the country. And then in this instance, promote specific type of development. And that's very specific to the city of Solvang. This committee, at least members of this committee, as well as members of the Planning Commission, City Council, and other various members of the community who are here this evening, worked very hard as members of what's called the GPAC. And they helped craft a community design element. And that element basically came up with design districts. So naturally, these districts, and some of them cross what we call zoning districts, and we'll get into that in a minute. An overlay would be the perfect example for our community to basically standardize what we've committed through a policy document in the community design element. And like other zoning regulations, overlays can control building design and form, permitted land uses, density, and other factors, et cetera. And again, it acts as sort of this additional layer of regulations because we, as a city, have identified these areas that need additional protection or regulation for whatever have you. So that's where the overlay comes into play. So we are proposing overlays. First one is incorporating the actual specific plan, SB2, that was lost on a lot of people. That's known as the Village Collective, by the way, as today. It used to be known as Village Estates, but it's collectively people refer to the area as the Village Collective. So basically reflecting that in the map that it's actually been adopted and creating its own sort of sub-district and then referring back to the specific plan and actually putting the specific plan on our website because that's what, we're good stewards of public discourse. The second one is proposing 2 design district overlay zones for consistency with our new community design element. The first one is the village area, or DD1. DD stands for design district. And then mission, which is DD2, or design district 2. Again, following sort of that formula that was laid out to us by the community design element. The purpose is to codify objective standards. So what are objective standards? I know I've spoken to many of you DRCA members and Planning Commission and City Council ad nauseum about that, but objective standards are standards that we can use numeric metrics to determine sort of a consistent form in building form. And it's very important, particularly into residential design, because for new residences, the state of California has made it very clear since 2017 that we can no longer enforce our subjective elements. What are subjective elements? Subjective elements are view sheds, colors, forms that just are left with a lot of ambiguous language, and that is to the eye of the beholder. A setback, it's not subjective. It's very objective. You know, a building setback is 10 feet, period, end of story. You can measure it on a piece of paper. Objective standards do the same thing. So if you want a particular window at a particular size and a window height, you create an objective standard to that. If you want a particular trim, you create an objective standard to that. That's what this does, is in theory, as development moves forward, and we currently have one potential development project in the Mission Design District, and we have two, to city staff's knowledge, potential residential projects in the Village District that would not be subject to any of the newly minted community design element policies because they are subjective. So for 4 years, we as a city have worked extremely hard to craft these policies. But unless we make them subjective, they are not applicable. That is a waste.
Subjective or objective?
Objective.
Okay. good.
That is a waste.
I think you said
Yes,
subjective.
sorry. That obviously, I don't want to say it's a waste of people's time, but clearly it's the next logical step to implementation, which is why we're presenting this evening this to you in a draft form. And it is meant to be a starter. It is rough but not rough, enough to basically allow us to be objective in terms of design, but the ability for us to put something onto paper now so that we can protect the hard work that's been done by the GPAC, the Planning Commission, the DRC, and the City Council, and residents who have worked hard over the last 4 years. So again, the proposed standards would assist city staff as well as applicants to set minimum expectations of development regardless of use, because we are looking at building form. So it doesn't matter if it's a residential use, it doesn't matter if it's a commercial use, we're looking at the building form itself. So let me dive into the Village Design District, or DD1. So the Village Design District is shown in the outline in yellow. One of the major changes that was done by the Planning Commission and then adopted by the City Council is this area along Copenhagen. So this area along Copenhagen was originally notched out, is that it was a residential district. It was brought to the Planning Commission's attention, and the Planning Commission decided to bring that back in. These happen to be what we considered our DR20 or proposed R3 high-density districts. So again, if potential projects move forward in those districts, we would essentially have no say right now as it stands from both a policy standpoint and our zoning code standpoint. We want to bring that authority and say back to city staff, back to the hands of the decision makers. So the DD1 is, city staff is proposing the following, that the design district overlay would kick in under the following scenarios. The first one is all new buildings after adoption, with the exception of accessory dwelling units with existing single-family homes or single-unit homes. And the reason being is we do have quite a few existing single-family homes here. In our current iteration of the TRC, they're not allowed to expand at all. They're considered non-conforming uses. That will go away. We will allow for the expansion addition of these single-family homes. We actually embrace the ability for these to become horizontal mixed uses or vertical mixed uses. But if they are to retain sort of that existing single-family home, these will not apply. And obviously, because we don't want two type of mismatched additions, et cetera, to single-family homes, particularly since we are going for a design motif that is consistent with what's been laid out in the general plan. The second one is the redevelopment of buildings greater than 500 square feet. And this one is where we are definitely asking for feedback from the DRC of allowing this as an exception. Again, we need to keep in mind that what are our thresholds that we established to kick these in. Some of our buildings here in the village do not conform to the proposed design motifs. So we need to potentially allow for potential exceptions. So what does that square footage look like? Right now, as it stands, just to give you a reference, our code has 300 feet. That's just a number that was picked arbitrary 500 is kind of arbitrary as well, but 500 is a little bit more weighty, and it's weighty for two reasons. One, from a building code perspective, once you hit 500 square feet, there's a lot more requirements that you need to do, particularly when it comes to potential soils reports and other things. That 500 square foot level is rather a level of significance. It's a level of significance when it comes to fees, particularly school fees. The school fees are set at 500 square feet. So once you go, if you're below 500 square feet, you're doing any sort of new addition, you typically don't have to pay fees. Above 500, guess what? You pay fees. So that's why the 500 is set. There's a rhyme and reason versus just picking a number out of the hat. The second one is projects with proposed additional stories. Again, this is one where city staff is seeking some sort of direction for the DRC because, if we want to continue whatever existing design motif is there, but we want to be cognizant that, again, we're trying to, for properties that redevelop, we are very cognizant to try to stick with our old world Danish design motif that we have ongoing. Proposed repaintings of buildings, and then proposed re-roofs. So that does not change. That's what's currently said in the guidelines today. Again, that's now codified, and it becomes a big difference because in the proposed objective standards, we actually provide and lay out what we can and can't do.
Again, you talked about the maintaining the Danish motif, though.
Yes.
And how do you do that if you're required to have objective standards that are just, size, limits and so forth and so on?
We'll get into that in a minute.
Well, that's an important, are you, okay, well, okay, but you don't want to answer that, I guess.
No, I'll answer in the next couple slides.
Okay.
So. All right. So again, the design district implements key general plan principles, allows mixed use development, allows for ground level office retail with residential above ground. Residential components can be on the top or rear buildings or horizontal. Height, setbacks, and lot requirements need to be consistent with the underlying zoning district. So again, it's an overlay district. So think of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You put peanut butter on the top layer. The overlay is the jelly. So it's still got to be consistent with those setbacks that are established in either the proposed VMU, which is Village Mixed Use / TRC, or the R3 zone, unless it's noted specifically in the proposed objective standards. And then the focus is on facade and form. So let's get into the building form design. So it provides a menu of facade options, and you just hit the nail on the head, Pat, in terms of what does that look like. The options would be wood would be the preference, particularly when it comes to half timbers. Faux wood material that mimics wood would be an allowed material to be utilized. Stucco with smooth finishes. We have objective standards for materials to be used, such as bricks, such as half timbers. The objective standards provides for widths, minimum distances between the half timbers themselves. So again, it's looking at the form of the building, but in an objective way. So if you're going to use half timbers on the building, then it needs to meet the objective standards of the half builders. So what do you mean?
In terms of width,
Well, the designer would have to provide that to us. Okay. So that, in order, because they actually show it today. In most plans, they're there. They're sitting in there. They got a scale. We can measure it. That's, again, objective. I know in previous discussions, like Market Square is a great example, there was a very spirited discussion for this DRC board about the distance of the timbers. There's a minimum distance that's proposed in there. Again, minimum distance. Maximum is there, but as long as they meet that minimum distance, if they're utilizing half timbers, it meets the objective standard.
Raphael, can I just interrupt for a quick second to ask, may we ask questions as you go, or would you like us to hold the questions for the usual procedure?
Yeah, it'd be great to hold questions as I get through the presentation, then we'll go back. So
Okay,
yeah.
thank you for clarifying.
All right.
That's good.
So again, there will be a ton of, and that's the whole point of this, is to have a ton of questions. Building mass and height requirements, again, trying to keep that to 35 feet, but understanding that when it comes to this design, the old world Danish, there are dormers, there are gables, there are architectural features that may exceed the 35 feet. So it's making these conscious decisions that if they exceed them, then how are they exceeded? Are they exceeded because it's an architectural feature and it's a dormer and it's specifically specified in there? Then that's objective. Again, it's really trying to provide a set of standards that a designer can pick up and provide a drawing to the city staff and ultimately the review authority, whoever's reviewing the application, to go off of and set those minimum expectations rather than what is currently present today, which is we have a set of guidelines, but the guidelines may differ from Commissioner Lapp, may differ from Commissioner Kavanaugh, may differ from Commissioner Bates, and it may even differ from the board that was before you, the board that's in the future. We can go back in time and you can read all the BAR minutes, and it's everywhere. So these are really just to provide a set of standards. Roofing and window and ornamental details also have minimum requirements that are with there as well. So the roof windows are a great example. There's minimum requirements in terms of the height width ratio that, again, we can objectively look at and say, does it meet the standard or does it not? Because if it doesn't meet the standard, that's an easy thing for city staff to say, you do not meet the standard, go redesign that. So it allows the city staff to be a little bit more of a bad cop versus the DRC to be the bad cop, because the standards are codified, they're right in front of you. You don't meet the width of this window. You can try doing the other window. You can do this other window, but you don't meet that objectively. Lighting standards are also provided, which focuses on shielded lighting fixtures. There's a maximum height for outdoor lighting fixtures to be established. Maximum pole heights, and again, we at 20 feet, that sounds like it's a little too tall now that I'm really looking at it again. Maybe that brings it down to 15. Maybe we bring it down to 12. These are things we can adjust, but it's a standard. So when someone proposes lighting on a building on a second floor, we can easily say, rather than say, well, we don't like it because it might shine a little bit more light, it is inconsistent with the standards, therefore go move it down below the threshold. Big difference. Lighting, landscaping must meet the minimum standards of 10%. And in larger developments need to incorporate additional gathering spaces. So again, it's built in terms of project size. 15,000 square feet is what it's currently built in. That can be changed based on direction this evening. But again, the whole point is this is a start. If something doesn't work, we can go ahead and amend that. That's the other thing to remember is, unlike our zoning code, which has not really been touched for 30 plus years, the intention is see how it works, see where it doesn't work, bring it back for amendments. And that's okay, because again, we're trying to execute the policies of the general plan. One of the bigger issues that we have ongoing is the color appendix. And so we are proposing color palettes be utilized in the DRC to assist in city staff in crafting sort of a plug-and-play color palettes. These are predetermined color palettes so that we can then either use this as an appendix or a handbook, which is codified. It would be codified, if it's a handbook, it would be codified directly that the planning manager and the department would have a handbook on hand and post it on a website. A handbook's a lot easier to deal with because then you're able to then modify that as you go along. But again, the intention is an applicant, and we get this a lot, is an applicant says, I want to repaint my building, and then they ask, well, what colors are required? If you look in our guidelines, it's very subjective. And that typically tends to be a bone of contention between applicants and the DRC and city staff in terms of having what types of color palettes. So essentially having the ability to plug and play color palettes is most essential for having this to work. And again, if it doesn't work, it's okay. We can amend the code, but you got to start somewhere. And that's really the jux to this conversation. And finally, there is what's called an alternative compliance section. So again, while we are looking for a particular old world Danish Tudor design motif, we do need to provide some avenue of alternative compliance. So what does that mean is that if I'm a developer and I go through all the objective standards and I basically say, no, I don't want to do any of these. I'm set in my design because I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. We can then say, okay, we will take you to the review authority and you can request the alternative compliance. We provide findings for the alternative compliance that need to be made. And then it becomes up to the review authority to either approve or basically send back to either meet that objective standard. So again, having that alternative compliance built in is really key as well. It gives that opportunity for an applicant to potentially deviate, and maybe there are trade-offs, particularly if they provide additional open space or additional residential units or et cetera, there's ability to have some sort of wiggle room in terms of alternative compliance. So the second overlay district is known as Mission Design District, or DD2, and very similar to that is where it's going to be required. All new buildings after adoption, that's pretty standard, except for ADUs with single unit homes, and we do have a lot more single family homes in this area. So again, looking at the exceptions and crafting those is key. Redevelopments of buildings greater than 500 square feet, additions of greater than 500 square feet with exceptions, and then projects that propose additional stories. So again, where do we craft those exceptions on existing buildings in order to allow for expansion, or do we just don't want to allow for expansion? That's where the wiggle room is. And again, so we're requesting feedback on those potential exceptions. And then again, implements the key general plan principles of mixed use. Heights and setback requirements, very similar to the village, are consistent with the underlying zoning district, which in this instance, it's the village mixed use, the R1, R3, the office professional, and the commercial retail zones, unless it's noted. And very similar focuses on facade and form. So here, the mission motif is a little bit different. You don't have necessarily as many materials to play with, but it is stucco facades, objective standards for the materials that are there, the building mass and height requirements, roofing and window and ornamental detail minimum requirements. Again, same thing. Can you meet the minimum standards? Particularly, we're looking to not have blank walls, et cetera. You run into our current village. There's quite a few buildings, especially on the side street, that have length of walls that aren't broken up by windows or ornament or details. Both design districts are looking to provide sort of those standards for that. And very similar, the lighting standards, shielded, maximum height for outdoor fixtures, and then meeting minimum landscaping requirements, and then pedestrian and circulation standards. So again, just providing you a very high-level sort of go-over of what the objective standards are, but they are in your staff report. And so again, we're looking for feedback on them. Because again, the objective standards are where you start. It becomes, if these get codified, you either meet them or you don't. It's a pretty plain and simple exercise, and it really helps to formulate projects that come through the door and let them understand that we in particular have identified these areas, and we are looking for a particular type of design in these neighborhoods. So I'll open up to questions, comments, and whatever else we have from the DRC.
Quick question in terms of the Mission District and where Wildwood, was there a reason why it's excluded out of this map?
I actually don't have that information. That was a decision made long before I came on board, but it's always been excluded. Unfortunately, maybe Esther can better off to answer that question, or potentially even Lansing or Dennis, who are here. But I don't have the reason and rationale for that.
I think it should be included personally.
Not to berate an issue here, but even if you were to include it today, it doesn't affect the application that's
Right.
in process.
Because it's a builder's remedy, yeah.
Even then, it's already in process in play. And residential projects have a little bit more protections due to state law.
Yeah, and we can't apply new rules to projects in the pike.
Time of question.
Yeah, other,
Oui?
we have
Yes.
lots of questions as the conversation moves along, I'm sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so me, I have a suggestion about the color, this old world writing, and also the mission style. So we could make research, find document, color, style of writing, and make either booklet or big board.
Are you talking about the handbook?
Yes.
So, again, because we're trying to do this quickly, the handbook would serve. So basically, the handbook could become an interpretation of the ordinance itself and include a little bit more rudimentary drawings to help people out in terms of
Yes.
what we're looking for. But as far as the colors, that's something we would work with the DRC.
Bah.
As far as writing and I'm assuming you're meaning fonts and those things. Are you talking about signs?
Yes.
Because that signs are not on the table in regards to
Oh,
this.
it's
Not today.
subjective.
Yeah.
Oh,
That is a different work effort, different
Okay,
everything.
so we forgot the writing, but for the color, it's easy to find the Danish color, in the internet and reproduce them on a big board and show the people.
I mean, that's the intention is to work with the DRC to formulate those colors in an open forum. Is
And
what it comes
there's
down to.
that is not addressed as far as body colors. There's a little bit about the half
No,
timbers, but
I've
other than that, that's not in this packet.
Correct, and I've intentionally done that
Yes.
simply because, again,
That's another conversation.
that's another conversation that, in my professional opinion, it needs to have much more vetting of this body in particular, since you are the DRC. It needs a more intensive work effort, and at the same token, we would write in if these objective standards get codified as part of implementation that until the handbook is adopted, the DRC still becomes the body for colors and still the body for landscape, and still, so you will still have that sort of ability to help mold projects in that regards.
Okay, so you just answered a couple of my questions right there, which was, what are we doing in the interim?
Yeah, and again, same with building form. The intention, particularly in commercial projects, I'm going to leave that there, is still have the DRC review them and still have the DRC provide comments to them. But the objective standards, essentially it becomes it's met the objective standard. You may pass to the DRC.
Yeah. So what I would like to encourage is that the applicants come to the DRC when they're in the design process with kind of a pre-meeting to get direction and comments to help them in crafting their projects to meet the codes and that are being put in place.
And you've read my mind because, again, I didn't give you the entire, Dave's seen the entire thing.
Yeah.
Yes, he has. But the implementation, basically, I've chucked it all because it's insufficient. And so, and in our code today, in our fee schedule, we have what's called a pre-meeting, essentially. But nothing in that code today tells me how I'm supposed to treat that. And in the proposed code, there is pre-application review, and it outlines exactly what we do. We look for objective standards, we go through the policies, we route it to other city departments, and it goes to DRC for review. And so that's in there, and that is the entire point of this, is making this body, having applicants go through a pre-app review at first and have this body, this DRC, because you are the ones that are knowledgeable and you are representative of our residents, of our business owners, and while the public can comment, you are essentially that body to really hammer home if a developer, doesn't meet the objective standard, and we identify that in a pre-app review, you can hammer home, you got to go meet that objective standard.
And
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I have a related question following up on that, and first of all, I want to know, where did this come from? Did you write this yourself, or did we buy it? Is this a standard that is a Tascadero or someplace, or that we're reading?
I wrote everything myself.
You wrote it yourself?
Very much so.
Okay.
Again, a little bit of background on myself is prior to here,
Yeah.
I was previously employed at 2 other municipalities, but prior to that, I worked at a planning and design firm for
Okay.
10 plus years, and this was my bread and
Okay,
butter.
so back to the point you were talking about, the review authority, or the DRC world. I'm looking on page 33, which is section 1119.5, I guess, at the end, A. Review authority. Establish a review authority, which I assume is going to be the DRC, and that would be consistent with, another section for permit types. If the planning manager or their designee, I assume that means his designee, has determined that a proposed project has met the objective design standards, then the review authority, which I assume is the DRC, shall be limited to the following: landscaping, lighting, and colors. And you've talked about the colors where we would, the words you used, and it's on there, we would assist you in developing a palette of colors. Well, frankly, to me, that sounds like pretty thin gruel for the work of this board. I mean, I think frankly, if it's going to be all objective standards, and we have 3 areas that are set aside for us to help advise you, that if you've determined that the project has met the objective design standards, then our authority, quote, shall be limited to the following: landscaping, lighting, and colors. And then you've talked about this development of a palette that we would provide,
Yeah.
assist you in developing a palette of colors. I'm going, I mean,
Where does the design in the design
well,
review
there's
committee?
no review.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
design review. And I appreciate you're trying to make it seem like this is a big responsibility. It's pretty thin gruel, that's all. I think, and that's okay. I mean, if we're moving to a direction where there's no subjective determinations allowed on anything, but you've got, here it says, our authority, assuming that we're the review authority that you contemplate here, is limited if the objective standards or design standards are met, is limited to landscape, lighting, and colors. And even on colors, you say that we would, assist you in developing it.
Shouldn't
Doesn't seem to me
architecture,
like there's too much for the DRC really to do.
shouldn't architecture be added as one of those particular numbers?
It most certainly can. And again, that's
Yes.
the point of this discussion.
No,
Yeah.
but
And-
he's talking about it's met the objective design standards, which is going to be the architecture. That's what, the architecture is already
Sort of.
handled and covered by, and if the planning manager or their designee has determined the project has met the design standards, review authority shall be limited to lighting, landscaping, and color.
Again, it's draft. And
Well-
this is the feedback that we're looking for.
You want comments? You wrote
So-
it. That's why I wanted to find out where this came from.
Yeah,
You wrote it,
I
so
did.
I assume that's the intention that you meant.
The intention is
the
following,
plain
the intention is,
meaning of those words.
the intention is following the council goals that were established. Permit streamlining,
Yeah,
okay? Entitlement,
exactly.
and that's a way to do it. If
But
you meet the
it seems
objective
like
standard.
The streamlining really, essentially, I would not want to be part of a DRC that frankly doesn't have responsibility to exercise some judgment. And if that means, that's okay. If that is all the job is, I wish you all well.
Well,
Well-
and it is a conundrum, but I think that when I look at this, I do feel like there's a very important role that is not being recognized, because they can meet all these objective design standards, but that doesn't mean that all those standards are going to combine
does.
to make a,
It says if he approves it, if he determines that the proposed project has
Right.
met the objective design standards, it's not a decision by this body.
But that's
It's a
where it needs
decision
to
by
be
the
changed.
planning
Right.
manager.
And
Yeah.
again,
Well,
that,
I'm just saying, he wrote it, and that's apparently,
that's where I feel like the
and again, my point is, yes, it's a draft form, and I'm looking at the council goals of permit streamlining
yeah,
and entitlement revisions,
yeah.
and providing the ability of a clear path to able to get process of documents.
Well, it doesn't feel like it's part and parcel in my mind that we still have because the objective standards are X, Y, and Z, numbers,
Right.
percentages, et cetera.
And it could be
Right.
rewritten to say just
Design
that,
is
to
design.
include the building, and that's fine. We rewrite
Yeah.
it, and that's
Okay.
fine. And
I'm
again,
okay with that.
the reminder is these are draft forms, and we're looking for input. But to your point, Patrick, a lot of it's particularly in residential, because as it stands today, our code says that you're supposed to review residential. Well, you
Well,
literally have
clearly.
no power.
yeah.
So
There's no reason.
There's no
We don't.
reason
Yeah.
at all.
Nor do
So-
we want that responsibility.
Correct. So it probably should be noted, and I believe in the version that you obviously don't have, the chapter is, it kind of says it straight up. If it's a residential project of more than, I believe it says like 8 or 10 units, maybe more. I believe 10 is what it is you won't see it. And that's because the state is very clear, and particularly now as of July 1st, you can go straight forward to go at 10 units.
Yeah. And we also do understand that there are state-imposed mandates and requirements that leave everybody in this
Absolutely,
room out of the equation.
Those will change the way,
So-
lots of cities across the state are going to operate this function. This
Yeah.
function has existed for a while. It's obviously changed and evolved only in the last few years. And that's okay, but it may be that I would hate to go through kind of waste time in a meaningless project here if, according to state law, they say that, there's no, just get your set of objective standards, cities do that, and then if the design director says that that's adequate, it's met, case closed. And that's fine. I mean, if that's what they're going, and I know that I know they've tried to move away from some of the.
To streamline the
It's a
process.
and it's a
That's
delicate
part of it, but
it's a
it's-
delicate balance too there, simply because the state legislature in their infinite wisdom passes all these laws, but they tend to forget the basis of why you guys are actually here.
It doesn't change the laws that the laws are passed, so there's not much you can do about it.
Right. The basis of why you're here
one
is
question I
to
have
solicit public input.
is on that
Which
beginning
we
of
need
chapter
to do,
7,
too.
this is right after the map. It has commercial and industrial zones defined, and you have 5 different zones. Is there a map of those zones?
Yeah, it's just not included in your packet simply
Yeah.
because that's more of a planning commission function.
Okay.
Yeah. But it mirrors essentially the land use land use designations that
Yeah,
were
got it.
adopted.
Okay.
So I think the shall be limited perhaps needs to be reworded.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And-
I would think too with the sorry for
Yeah,
interrupting.
go- yeah.
That there's only really one Solvang, and perhaps with the state of California, there's got to be a way to thread that needle somehow where we get what we want and we're somewhat within their
And this
overall guidelines.
And this is beginning to thread that needle, and that's what it comes down to. Because again, it's understanding that, and that's why I paused in my previous presentation, because it's very true. We have 2 potential applications that are waiting in the wings, and if they were to submit
Right.
tomorrow, none of this is applicable.
Including one that, despite our conversation and the commitment over the decades to Danish design, has a silo and a barn.
I'm not going to respond to that because
Yeah.
that item is
I
not up for
understand,
discussion.
But I'm just saying, that's,
So, you know what I'd like to do? I have lots more questions.
Yeah.
I think we all do. But I think maybe we open this up to the public, which may help us direct our questions a little more efficiently. Can we do that? Are you comfortable with doing that? And
If you
then
like.
staff, we will
If you like,
definitely have many more questions for you. Yes,
We have
well,
the
I
schedule. I
do
mean,
too,
that's-
so, but I think that, yes, I will take a break shortly here, but I would like to open it to public comment and then make a few comments. So I do have a speaker slip here from Dennis Beebe. We're on 4A. Dennis, would you like to come up to the podium? Please introduce yourself and.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for, serving our community. You have a memo from me in your package, but I had more time to look at the draft ordinances and have some other inputs to make tonight. I'm interested in more detailed process. Raphael said, intend to get to Planning Commission in September. What's going to happen between now and then? You don't have that many meetings, and I'm interested in what the public's opportunity is going to be to comment on what is a pretty substantial list of requirements in terms of design. If Raphael wrote this out of clean air, I don't know. But if he had the old ordinance next to him and he was making changes, that would clarify where some of this stuff come from. I don't know where some of these numbers and requirements came from. If I saw the changes, somehow, that would clarify it for me. Specifically, I support Raphael's mention that maybe 12-foot height for lights is better than 20. 20 seems extremely high, given the maximum height in the village, I think in Mission also, is 35 feet. My gosh, I don't know why that's not a village. The roof tile design wasn't specified for the village. It was specified for the Mission. It just said roof tile is permitted in the village of a certain color. I think you should specify what the roof tile design must be to be Old Danish. Roof materials, thatch isn't mentioned. I believe this body approved a bunch of cottages on the corner of Alisal and Mission that had thatch roofs, and yet it's not listed as a approved material. I think, like the Mission description roof materials, you ought to permit other materials as long as they mimic what you're after. You know, concrete isn't mentioned either, but why not concrete tile? And 20-foot lighting. Oh, yeah, that's it. I didn't have time to get through a very formidable packet. I hope I have more opportunity to look at it in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there any other speakers on this in the room? Then I will open it up to Zoom. Is there anybody on video? Looks like there's nobody there. Well, I'm going to close public comment on this and go back to our group here, our committee, and interactions. I would like to revisit the very last page where we were talking about the authority that we have. I think that is, yes, 33, page 33, top of the page A, review authority established. My thinking in looking at all the standards that are set forth in this document, it seems would be very easy to meet all those objective standards and yet have a project that is very aesthetically
Yes.
potentially displeasing or inappropriate, especially when looking at it in the context of the buildings that surround it and are across the street from it. So my very strong concern, and I think it sounds like my colleagues here echo that concern, is there are elements to those decisions that are subjective even though you've met all the objective standards. So you can meet all the objective standards, pick the paint that's on the palette, and still have a project that doesn't suit the location well. How can we address that with changes to this? Because that's why we're sitting here, is to
And
give
this-
that
That language
expertise.
confines the
Our role
planning
very,
manager
yeah,
to objective design standards.
is only. So how can we work on that wording to accomplish both objectives here?
We can put back in building architecture, but be specific. I would recommend that it is for
I need
any
that.
non-residential projects, it would be
Yes.
open to that. Residential is a different story.
Yes.
So
I agree.
yeah, and we most certainly can make that argument, and then leave then, at least for the residential portion. I again, seeing what areas you can be subjective in, landscaping, et cetera. I would almost direct me to make that rewrite and be specific. The other unfortunate part about it is it's going to punt to 1116, which is our implementation section. That's actually laid out in a review authority table, believe it or not. And that table basically outlines what types of development applications, where does it go, and who does it go to. So you'll get, I can bring that back as a separate item to the DRC, but most certainly we can make that change to solidify that the building design still will need to, is still the purview of the DRC.
Yeah, and
I
I'm
don't
not,
understand why you would, put landscaping on the list of those things that, wouldn't be subject to objective standards.
Again, the point of objective standards is to, if it meets it, off you go. That is the
Right.
true point of objective standards. And what I'm hearing from this board is you would like a hybrid of that.
No,
Yes.
What I'm talking about specifically is landscaping.
yeah, why is landscaping not an objective standard and we are still looking at it, was his question.
Because I have run out of time and people power to
be able
go
to-
to do landscaping, parking, lighting, and
Colors,
there's
obviously.
what colors, obviously. So
Yeah.
because right now, our to be frank, our parking, our landscaping standards are poor
Yes.
at best, and so I'd rather have that into your hands to be able to determine if it meets the design criteria based on the design that is presented, based on the context of the neighborhood and surrounding buildings,
And
et
I don't
cetera.
have, that explains to us why something that would be a little bit more obscure perhaps, and if I'm understanding correctly, Raphael, that this document is a work in progress. We are starting with, even when this is, getting its approval, this will be in place, but will be continue to be refined and expanded upon.
Absolutely. And a great
is
example
step
is
one.
fences.
Yeah.
Does anyone know on this board how tall of a fence you can have in the front setback of a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, I think it's 5 foot or 4'8" or something like that. So
I thought it was 62.
I believe it's less and it's never adhered to.
None of us know.
6 feet.
It is 6 feet.
72 inches.
So do you know typically what a front fence setback is for most standard residential neighborhoods? Anyone want to take a wild guess? I think it's 36. Bingo.
Yes, and that's violated all over the community.
That is correct.
Yeah, that's
So-
what I thought you were
yeah.
referring to, because
Yeah,
my
so-
husband knows that, and he's on a thing about that.
So that's a great example that our code says 6 feet. It's wildly a lot of folks are out of whack on it.
Yeah.
But the point is that I've identified that it's an issue, or just I haven't got there. And simply because I can only do so much along with my other duties, and I have Lisa here who's doing other applications. So this is very much meant to be a working document in terms of us codifying something and most certainly bringing it back because as a part of the budget, we are budgeted to have a consultant bring a consultant on board who will do the residential objective standards, which is what we care about a lot.
Right.
That then sets the tone.
And again, out of our purview.
And then, but bring this one back to you all and say, hey, can we refine this a little bit based on our experience in working with developers and help us refine what we got, as well as this board itself. If we identify something, then in a year, we come back and we say, X, Y, and Z does not work. Let's amend it.
I appreciate your work. I like the overall goal. I think it's.
Yeah, the goal-
genius to save yourself. I think it's important. We just add on to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We just make that a very specific list.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely what we need, and that should it meet the objective standards, does not exclude it from coming to this committee.
And again, that is a hybrid approach to things. Typically,
Yeah.
the way the state would like you to have it is
Understood.
is if it meets standards,
we're
off you go.
solving.
But we're solving.
Yeah.
And very much, this is a loud and clear on my end. And
Yeah.
again, I'm tasked to do one thing. Hence why I bring it to you to vet. We make changes, and then off we go to the public schedule. I know Mr. Beebe asked, what does that public schedule look like?
Yeah.
It actually slowed down a little bit because I had intended to bring this back to Planning Commission in 2 weeks.
I understood.
But,
yeah.
a little bit of a pause for the cause and get input from you. The council's the last remainder, but then go to Planning Commission on 9/2 or 3. It's the Monday after or Tuesday after Labor Day, and then immediately turn that around and go to council. And again, it is because time is of the essence, not only from proposed projects that are in the pipeline, but also in order to sort of do the final closing door of the builder's remedy with the final rezones, which has not been completed yet.
So I've got a question for you, because I have a lot of detail that I do not have time to go into tonight, nor do I think any of us are ready to go in the deep dive tonight. But we do need to revisit this. Can we revisit this at our August meeting and have that in place in time for the September, whatever it is, Planning Commission meeting? How do you want, what is the best method for handling this and keeping this transparent and open to the public?
In the spirit of transparency, I would like to put this in a public forum because, again, I'm only the shepherd as the planning manager. I'm each and every one of your go-to. We may spar at times, and that's okay. But ultimately, at the end, this is your community. And I think having the ability to refine based on your comments. So what I would like to happen, if you have comments, send them my way in the next 2 weeks. We can make those changes. We're taking this to City Council, again, for very similar what we're doing here on Monday. And I want to make those changes, and I want to try to get this as close to right as possible, but I know it's not going to be perfect. And to me, that's okay, because something is better than nothing.
Yeah, you mentioned that, it's a serious kind of resource issue, resource limit on you and your staff being able to do it all. I appreciate that. I notice on the cover memo here to the material that we were reading, it has fiscal impact, city staff's time to create amendments to the zoning authority based on direction. But also it says, that just above that, it is expected that after adoption, the consultants will be hired to provide objective standards for housing development. So, what part are you going to do in your staff, and what part is the consultant, and how much are those consultants going to cost?
So when you look at, actually, this part that you're seeing this evening, it's actually one of the more expensive parts that a consultant would have done. So I can't give you a price tag right now. We're earmarking.
No, but you said that you said the fiscal impact is your staff time, but
Correct.
you also say that after adoption, the consultant would be hired to provide the objective standards for housing development
But I
Right.
think the housing standards.
and
are
work with city staff and members of the public and the DRC.
Right, so-
refine the objective design standards.
So what that means is that this is a public forum. I'm projecting that work effort to be approximately, based on talking to other colleagues, between $100,000 to $120,000 to get done, because the objective standards for residential is a whole different ballgame, and
Yeah.
that requires workshops, not only with you as the DRC, but also requires workshop with developers, residents, and property owners, because that affects a lot more people, because then that affects the ability to do additions, that affects the ability to do ADUs, that affects the ability, it's a lot more
Right.
intensive, and
Okay.
it needs to have a lot more public participation in order to craft a set of objective standards throughout our entire residential zones, with the exception of the mission and
the-
village.
Yes.
Right.
And the state also has many more requirements, so that.
Sure.
Yeah.
That have
So-
to be interwoven in.
So that's the reality, is that's what's been budgeted for the next 2 years, is up between $100,000 to $120,000. And that was before, and I did that back in February is when I popped this in, and I assumed that they were going to do everything. This is actually quite a substantial lift that was done over the last
Sure.
60 hours
I can
of
see.
my time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, you've done a lot.
With that being, and it's not perfect. It's grammatically, there are times it sucks, so I'll give you that. I'm not. But-
I think what's important here, and what we see, is that this needs to address our specific community. Consultants can handle the housing and are better equipped for that perhaps than they are for this. And I'm pleased that we can have input here. We can't do this justice tonight. The method that I understand that you're asking for is that we provide you input, that is put into the document, that it then comes back to us and the public for a future meeting in August.
Right. So we're trying to move at the speed of light, which is not very
And
governmental.
keep the community informed, yeah. Because I have lots and lots of little things. And again, no, I don't think you actually want to sit through all of this,
No.
any of us.
No.
So,
And Chair Bates, if I could just jump in real quickly here.
Please.
In that effort, I would caution the members of the committee not to communicate directly with each other. It's
Understood.
a one-way communication with Raphael. I just want to put that on the record for you all.
yes,
Good admonition.
yes.
Yes.
We do understand, and thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. And again, this is the reason why it's moving at the speed of light is I personally don't want the hard work that this community has done go to waste. And I hate to say that.
Right, because we understand there's projects where this is needed, and it's needed sooner rather than later. The one thing that I would like to ask you, maybe here in a public forum, and you can answer quickly, is the lighting. I see specs on lighting. I don't see the words dark sky compliant, which I believe is in our code now? Okay, I'd like,
It's a policy.
okay,
So,
I'd like to see that policy that should be applied here. Can that be applied effectively in this?
that's part of the problem, is that there is dark sky certification. And as much as I'm an extreme advocate of dark skies, but in certain situations. So, case in point, you live in the hills, absolutely 100%, we should be dark sky compliant.
But we live in a small community where many of us, yeah, that's
but-
different. That's,
But
yeah.
here in the actual village, where the city doesn't control the main thoroughfare, that's Caltrans control. So
Understood.
that's already out of our purview.
Right.
And it can't, I mean, I understand the policy says dark sky. We most certainly can, but I caution that simply because by allowing dark sky, you kind of box yourself in to potential creative designs in lighting.
Well, to me, as I listen to my community and the input, and I look at my dark sky with the moon and the stars and the Milky Way and all of the, and a lot of rocket launches, I believe that it should be incorporated in and exceptions can be asked for, rather than leaving it out and then trying to ask the applicants to meet those standards.
So right now, the way it's written is it discussed that the lighting needs to be shielded downward facing. So
Yes.
it already helps out a lot. If you're requesting to do, again, then it once you start getting in that realm of requirements, then the exceptions, then it starts kicking into modification to standards. And modification to standards then has a set of findings that you have to make. And so it as much as the policy is there and it's there to be, it advocates for dark sky, to write it in to the village in particular, I think it's, from a professional opinion, it does a disservice to what the actual village is, and that is a very urban village context area, which means you have lighting for safety, you have a major highway that we do not control, we already have a lot of street lights, so how much hamstringing do you want to do to your developers where you already have a rigid set of design standards?
I see that.
Okay, so,
And you don't know how dark sky is going to change it going forward.
Right, and that's the other thing that we
Yes.
do not have control, because if we write in, needs to be dark sky compliant with what? What is
So,
that standard at that point? It
I-
is an industry standard that we have zero control over.
Right.
I have control all day long over shielding, over it's pointing downwards. We have that control. The minute you pop into, because this is great, where back in the early 2000s and 2010s, I don't know if anybody remembers LEED certified buildings. We were all over the LEED. We got it. Thou shalt make LEED certified buildings. Guess what? Industry standards caught up to LEED certification at this point. So pretty much most new construction can meet LEED certification like no one's
But it's
business.
still nice to have the badge on the.
It is very nice to pay an
That's-
extra
yeah.
for the badge. Don't get me wrong.
but it also wouldn't have gotten there, from my perspective, without having those stepping stones in place.
true. No,
So, policy, I'd like to direct, my request would be to have staff look at if there's somewhere between where it currently is and where I'm asking it to be. Can we refine those? I don't know if it's in lumens, if it's light spread, percentages,
Again, objective standards. So when we start talking lumens, now you're talking
That- no,
objective.
yeah.
So most certainly
Oh,
we
that's
can.
objective.
Very much so, because either the standard meets the lumens or it doesn't.
Right.
So again, now we're talking, and that is a standard.
Right.
So, but again, then you have to fish out certain. This is where we don't really want to get into it, because if a building code standard changes, now we got to go off what the building code standard says, even though the
Right,
even though the book,
understood.
the code says differently.
Yeah, but state code
State
supersedes
code
it.
will trump us.
Yeah.
So that's where I caution using the lumens, which is why it's a lot more rudimentary.
And I really feel like that's probably getting too far into the weeds. perhaps our friends at We Watch with their lighting committee have some recommendations that could be utilized in this
And
case.
we would definitely welcome those comments. And again, trying to not be so, use a definitive source, but instead, like this one, a little bit more open-ended, but that control is back in our hands. That's what we want.
Right. All right, so the understanding that I have is that we are tasked, if there are comments that we wish to make, we can send those to you. Can you send this in any kind of a document other than a PDF that makes that easier for
I will
us?
make that available for the DRC, yeah.
With maybe some direction as to how you would like us to put in our changes? Because I don't think we want to have a
And
track
again-
changes that everybody's working in.
Comments made today.
Correct.
Yeah.
In addition to the comments made by Mr. Beebe, yes, well, certainly we can do that. And you,
Yeah.
I mean, during the, yeah,
yeah.
that's all.
Most certainly,
Yeah.
we can, very similar to what we had with the GPAC, we can most certainly make that available.
So we should probably wait until you incorporate some of what we have discussed this evening, send us a document.
There's no action item tonight. It's simply, again, an informational item.
Okay.
And the direction I'm hearing from you, and if this is agreement to the DRC, is that, one, that you provide comments to me, and then also that the document be made available in a editable fashion with directions on how to edit and give you a time frame for when we need to close those edits
Yes.
so that we can write a staff report and bring it back to y'all.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, agreed. Okay, let's see what we have to do, because I do need to step out here. My vice chair isn't here, although I can delegate that responsibility. I'm just looking to see if what we have left tonight.
This committee and staff.
It's committee and staff comments as well.
Yeah, okay. Committee comments?
No.
Okay, and then we'll return next week.
Right, so.
Staff comments?
Very quick, again, July 25th, next week, 5 o'clock, we will hear the Rossaman item as well as Denmarket Square. So we do welcome comments at any time in regards to that, up to the meeting and even at that meeting. And then, again, we are trying to move forward very quickly here on the zoning ordinance amendments. This was just one piece. There's actually a huge amount of text that's being amended from this effort. So
Okay.
that's all my comments.
Thank you.
Move we adjourn.
Okay,
We'll move, yeah.
yep, okay, I think the meeting is adjourned at 6:34.